You gold-digging tramp, you won't get a cent!
Excuse me? Let's just hear the will.
Very well. The estate goes to the ex-wife.
That would be me.
What? No! This—
The empire is hers?
The room went silent the moment Brooke laughed. So this is the famous ex-wife? She asked, looking Claire up and down as if she was something dragged in from the rain. I'm surprised they let gold diggers attend will readings. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably, but no one defended Claire. Not even Ethan, her ex-husband, who sat beside his mistress with one hand resting smugly on her knee. Claire said nothing. She had not come for Ethan's money. Their divorce settlement had been modest, and she had signed every document without a fight. She was there because Ethan's late grandfather, Charles Blackwood, had requested her presence before his death. Brooke mistook Claire's silence for humiliation. Let me guess, she continued, you're hoping the old man left you a pity check. Ethan smirked. Don't embarrass yourself, Claire. Whatever connection you had to this family ended when we divorced. The attorney at the head of the table removed his glasses. Actually, he said, Mr. Blackwood anticipated this misunderstanding. He opened a sealed envelope marked with Charles's signature and the stamp of the family trust. Ethan's smile faded. Brooke's hand slipped from his knee. The attorney explained that years earlier, while Ethan and the rest of the family fought over dividends, Claire had quietly cared for Charles through his illness, protected the company during a fraud investigation, and refused every reward he offered. In response, Charles had amended the trust, not the public will, naming Claire the controlling beneficiary of Blackwood Holdings. The mansion, the investments, and 51% of the family empire now belonged to her. Ethan stood so fast, his chair struck the wall. Brooke turned pale. Claire finally looked at them both. Then the attorney revealed the final clause. Anyone who challenged Claire's inheritance would immediately lose everything Charles had left them. Before we continue, kindly subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because this story is not only about money. It is about betrayal, hidden sacrifices, and the kind of karma that arrives when arrogant people believe kindness is weakness. And if you believe a loyal heart deserves more than a greedy one, support this channel now, because what Claire discovered next would expose a secret far greater than the inheritance itself. For several seconds, the only sound in the library was the steady ticking of the antique clock above the fireplace. Ethan remained standing, his face drained of color. His mother, Margaret Blackwood, gripped the arms of her chair. His uncle, Dean, stared at the attorney as though he had spoken in a foreign language. Even the relatives who had spent the morning whispering about how much they expected to receive had suddenly forgotten how to breathe. Brooke recovered first. This is ridiculous, she said. Her voice sounded confident, but Claire noticed the slight tremor in it. Brooke stood and pointed at the documents on the table. She wasn't even family when he died. She divorced Ethan 2 years ago. How could Charles leave control of the company to a complete outsider? Samuel Price, the family attorney, folded his hands calmly. Because Blackwood Holdings was never part of the probate estate. Brooke frowned. Samuel continued. The voting shares were placed in an irrevocable family trust 14 years ago. Mr. Blackwood retained the right to designate his successor controlling beneficiary under clearly defined conditions. 2 years ago, after medical evaluations confirmed that he was mentally competent, he executed an amendment naming Claire Bennett as that successor. Margaret shook her head. Charles would never do that. Samuel slid 3 folders across the table. These contained statements from 2 independent physicians, a recorded interview with a probate judge, signed affidavits from the trust officers, and video evidence of Mr. Blackwood explaining his decision in his own words. Ethan looked at Claire as if he was seeing her for the first time. You knew. It was not a question. Claire lowered her eyes to the blue folder in front of her. She had known that Charles had made provisions for her. 3 days before his death, Samuel had asked her to sign a confidential acknowledgement stating that she would accept certain responsibilities if Charles did not recover. But she had not known their full extent. She had expected oversight of his charitable foundation, perhaps a seat on the board, or the responsibility of protecting the jobs of the household staff. She had never imagined 51% of Blackwood Holdings. I knew he wanted me to protect something, Claire said. I didn't know he meant all of this. Brooke gave a sharp laugh. And we're supposed to believe that. Claire turned toward her. You can believe whatever helps you sleep tonight. The words were quiet, but they landed harder than shouting. Brooke opened her mouth, but Samuel raised one hand. We are not finished. He pressed a button on the remote beside him. The large television, mounted above the bookcase, flickered to life. Charles Blackwood appeared on the screen. He looked thinner than Claire remembered. His silver hair had been carefully combed, and although illness had weakened his body, his eyes remained sharp. Ethan slowly sat down. Margaret covered her mouth. Charles looked directly into the camera. If you are watching this, he began, then I have finally gone somewhere none of you can follow with lawyers, arguments, or expensive gifts. No one laughed. Charles leaned closer to the camera. I built Blackwood Holdings from a single warehouse and a borrowed delivery truck. I made mistakes. I neglected people who loved me. I rewarded ambition when I should have rewarded character. And because of that, I watched greed enter this family one comfortable year at a time. Claire felt a pressure building behind her eyes. The recording had been made in Charles's private study. She recognized the lamp beside him and the green blanket folded over his knees. It was the same blanket she had brought him on the night he admitted he was afraid to die. Charles continued. Some of you believe inheritance is payment for sharing my name. It is not. Inheritance is responsibility. Wealth without discipline destroys families. Power without compassion destroys companies. His gaze seemed to settle on Ethan. And love without loyalty destroys the person who offered it. Ethan looked away from the screen. Claire's thoughts drifted back 12 years to the first time she met Charles Blackwood. She had not known he was wealthy. At the time, Claire was 23 and working 2 jobs to finish nursing school. Her father had died when she was 16, leaving behind medical bills that consumed nearly everything the family owned. Her mother, Diane, had disappeared less than a year later, leaving Claire to live with an elderly aunt in a small apartment above a laundromat. Claire learned early that promises were easy to make when life was comfortable. She also learned that the people who stayed during difficult times were rarely the ones who spoke the loudest. One winter evening, while working at a roadside diner outside Hartford, Claire noticed an elderly man sitting alone in a corner booth. His coat was expensive, but rainwater dripped from its sleeves. His hands trembled as he tried to open a packet of sugar. Claire approached him. "Sir, are you feeling all right?" "I'm fine," he muttered. Then he nearly collapsed. Claire caught his shoulder before his head struck the table. She recognized the symptoms of low blood sugar and immediately brought him orange juice, crackers, and a bowl of soup. His driver had gone to find help after their car broke down, but the storm had disrupted phone service. Claire stayed beside the stranger for almost an hour. When the bill came, the man reached into his coat and realized his wallet was still in the car. "I suppose this is embarrassing," he said. Claire paid for his meal herself. It cost nearly half the tips she had earned that night. "You don't even know me," he said. "You needed help," Claire answered. "That was enough." 3 weeks later, Ethan brought Claire to a Blackwood family dinner. The moment Charles entered the dining room, he stopped. Claire froze too. "You," Charles said. Ethan looked between them. "You two know each other." Charles smiled. This young woman saved me from spending a night face down in a bowl of tomato soup. The family laughed, but Charles did not. He looked at Claire with an expression she would remember for the rest of her life. It was not gratitude alone. It was recognition, as if he had spent years surrounded by people who knew his net worth and had finally met someone who had helped him without knowing his name. On the television, Charles paused to gather his breath. Claire returned to the present. "I did not choose Claire because she was perfect," he said. "I chose her because when no one was watching, she repeatedly chose what was right." The video ended. Brooke crossed her arms. A touching performance, but it proves nothing. Samuel looked at her. It proves intent. The documents establish legality. Uncle Dean leaned forward. "What exactly did Charles leave the rest of us?" Samuel opened the public will. The probate estate has an estimated value of $3,500,000 after taxes, charitable gifts, and outstanding obligations. Margaret stared at him. "That is impossible. Charles was worth hundreds of millions." Blackwood Holdings, the primary investment portfolio, the mansion, and Blackwood Ridge Farm were owned by the trust, Samuel explained. They were never part of the probate estate. Dean's face reddened. "So we are expected to divide $3.5 million while she controls everything else." Under the will, each of Charles's surviving children and grandchildren receives a specified amount. However, those gifts remain subject to the no contest clause. Ethan's jaw tightened. "And if we challenge the trust?" "You forfeit your gifts, your remaining non-voting shares, your housing allowances, and any future distributions." Margaret whispered, "He trapped us." "No," Claire said. Everyone looked at her. "He protected his decision." Brooke stepped closer to Ethan. "You cannot let her do this." Claire noticed the word Brooke used. "Not them. Her." As if the company, the mansion, and the family history had already belonged to Brooke. Ethan rubbed his forehead. "There has to be another option." "There is," Samuel said. "Accept Mr. Blackwood's decision." That afternoon, the relatives left the mansion in angry clusters. Some refused to look at Claire, others suddenly became polite. Cousins who had ignored her for years asked whether she remembered their birthdays. An aunt who had once refused to invite Claire to a Christmas dinner embraced her at the doorway and whispered that they should start fresh. Claire understood what Charles meant. Money did not always change people. Sometimes it simply removed the need to pretend. Brooke remained behind with Ethan. Claire stood near the fireplace while Samuel explained the immediate responsibilities of controlling the trust. The company employed more than 8,000 people. Claire would have the power to appoint board members, approve major sales, block acquisitions, and replace senior executives. But the trust also imposed limitations. She could not sell the controlling shares for personal gain. She could not dissolve the company without independent approval. A portion of annual profits had to fund employee pensions, community programs, and the Blackwood Foundation. Charles had not handed Claire a treasure chest. He had handed her a burden wrapped in gold. When Samuel finished, Ethan approached her. "Can we speak privately?" Brooke grabbed his arm. "Why?" "Because I was married to her for 8 years. And now you're not." Ethan pulled away. For one brief second, Claire saw something flicker across Brooke's face. Not jealousy. Fear. That was when Claire remembered the warning Charles had given her 6 months before he died. They had been sitting in the greenhouse at the back of the mansion. Charles was too weak to walk without assistance, but he insisted on checking the white roses he had planted for his late wife. "Some people enter a family through love," he said. "Others enter through opportunity." Claire had assumed he was talking about Dean, whose business ventures had repeatedly required Charles to rescue him. Now she was no longer certain. Ethan followed Claire into the hallway. "What did you say to him?" he demanded. "Nothing that made him change the trust. He loved me. Yes. I'm his grandson. Yes. Then why would he humiliate me like this?" Claire studied his face. 2 years earlier, she would have reached for him. She would have tried to soften the truth until it no longer hurt. But Ethan had taught her the danger of protecting someone from every consequence. "He didn't humiliate you," she said. "Your choices did." His expression hardened. "You've wanted revenge since the divorce." "If I wanted revenge, I would have fought for half of everything you owned. You signed that settlement because you knew this was coming." "I signed it because I didn't want to spend another year begging someone to remember my value." Ethan flinched. Claire walked away before her voice could break. Their marriage had not always been cruel. That was what made the betrayal so difficult to explain. In the beginning, Ethan was attentive, funny, and restless in a way Claire found exciting. He spoke about building something of his own instead of living beneath his grandfather's name. While Claire studied for nursing exams, Ethan sat beside her at the kitchen table, developing business plans on a legal pad. When she became overwhelmed, he made coffee and tested her with flashcards. When he was rejected from an executive training program, she stayed awake with him until dawn, reminding him that failure was not the same as worthlessness. They married in a small church with fewer than 40 guests. Charles attended without security and danced with Claire beneath cheap paper lanterns. At the reception, he slipped a folded note into her hand. "Never let this family teach you to measure yourself by what you possess," it read. For several years, Claire believed she and Ethan were different from the rest of them. Then Ethan was promoted. The dinners became later. The phone calls became shorter. He began measuring every room by who had the most influence inside it. Brooke entered their lives as a communications consultant hired to improve Blackwood Holdings' public image. She was polished, beautiful, and skilled at telling powerful people whatever made them feel misunderstood. She praised Ethan's instincts. She laughed at jokes Claire had heard 100 times. She told him Charles was threatened by his ambition. By the time Claire noticed Ethan changing, he had already started rewriting their history. Her support became criticism. Her concern became control. Her years of sacrifice became proof that she lacked ambition. One evening, Claire found a hotel receipt in the pocket of Ethan's jacket. He denied everything. 2 weeks later, Brooke's diamond earring fell from the passenger seat of his car. The final betrayal came on the night of Claire's 34th birthday. Ethan promised to meet her at the little Italian restaurant where he had proposed. Claire waited for 2 hours beside a slice of untouched chocolate cake. When she returned home, she found Ethan packing a suitcase. Brooke was waiting in a car across the street. "I never meant for it to happen this way," Ethan said. Claire looked through the window at Brooke. "How long?" Ethan said nothing. "How long?" "Almost a year." Something inside Claire went completely still. Not because she had stopped loving him. Because she finally understood that he had been watching her fight for a marriage he had already abandoned. During the divorce, Margaret accused Claire of marrying Ethan for money. Dean suggested she accept a private payment and disappear. Brooke told mutual friends that Claire had become unstable. Ethan remained silent while the woman he loved destroyed the reputation of the woman who had built his life with him. Claire could have demanded more. Her attorney told her she had evidence of marital misconduct and a credible claim to several shared assets. But every negotiation required her to sit across from Ethan while he spoke about their marriage as if it had been a poor investment. Claire accepted a modest settlement, kept her father's old car, and moved into a 2-bedroom apartment near the hospital. Charles called her the following morning. "Did they pressure you? I made my choice. You deserved more. I deserved peace." There was silence on the line. Then Charles said, "Peace bought by surrender is sometimes only quiet pain." Claire almost stopped visiting him after the divorce. She feared the family would accuse her of clinging to the Blackwood name. But Charles's health worsened. His private nurse noticed that he ate better when Claire visited. He trusted Claire to ask doctors the questions others avoided. And so she continued coming. Not as Ethan's wife, not as a future heir, simply as the young woman who had once paid for a stranger's soup. That kindness changed everything. It was during one of those visits that Claire discovered the first sign of fraud. Charles had asked her to retrieve a folder from his desk. As she lifted it, several invoices slid onto the floor. Claire noticed that 3 different consulting companies had submitted bills with identical formatting errors. The amounts were enormous. Each invoice had been approved by Dean. 2 also carried Ethan's electronic authorization. Claire brought the documents to Charles. He examined them for a long time. "Did you show anyone else?" "No, not even Ethan." Claire hesitated. "No." Charles nodded slowly. "That may have saved this company." The investigation remained secret for almost a year. A forensic accounting firm discovered that more than $18 million had been moved through inflated contracts and shell companies. Dean claimed he had been deceived by outside vendors. Ethan insisted his electronic approvals had been attached to bundled documents he never properly reviewed. There was not enough evidence to prove Ethan knowingly participated. But there was enough to establish that someone inside Blackwood Holdings had access to confidential land valuations, internal signatures, and executive passwords. Claire helped Samuel organize the evidence. She identified discrepancies in medical insurance accounts and uncovered a fake charity invoice disguised as a donation. Charles offered her $2 million for her work. She refused. He offered to purchase her apartment. She refused that too. "Why?" Charles asked. "Because if I take money now, they'll say I did it for money. People determined to misunderstand you will do so for free. Then let them, I still need to know who I am." Charles smiled sadly. The ones who ask for the least are often trusted with the most. At the time, Claire thought it was simply another one of his lessons. Now standing in the mansion as the new controlling beneficiary, she understood it had been a promise. That evening, after the family left, Samuel handed her a brass key. "What does this open?" Claire asked. "The private office at Blackwood Ridge Farm." Claire frowned. The farm had been a running joke in the family for years. Charles bought the property decades earlier, before the company became successful. It consisted of nearly 600 acres of rocky fields, abandoned barns, and an old farmhouse no one used. Ethan called it Grandpa's worthless farm. Margaret repeatedly urged Charles to sell it. Samuel's expression became serious. "Charles instructed me to tell you that the farm contains the answer to the question you have not yet asked." "What question?" "Who was the fraud really designed to benefit?" The following morning, Claire drove to Blackwood Ridge. Rain pressed against the windshield as she followed the narrow road through bare trees. The farmhouse appeared at the top of a hill, its porch leaning slightly toward the east. Claire parked beside an old barn. Inside the house, dust covered the furniture, but the office door had a modern security lock. The brass key opened a panel beside it, revealing a keypad. Claire entered Charles's birthday. The door clicked. Inside, she found maps, contracts, geological reports, and a metal filing cabinet. A red folder lay in the center of the desk. Across the front, Charles had written 2 words. For Claire. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The first document was an appraisal. Blackwood Ridge was not worthless. 5 years earlier, engineers discovered that the property sat at the intersection of 2 planned energy transmission routes. A renewable infrastructure company had negotiated an option to lease part of the land for a large battery storage and research facility. The projected value exceeded $120 million. The agreement had not been announced because permits were still pending. The second document was more disturbing. 6 months earlier, Dean and Margaret had signed a preliminary agreement to sell Blackwood Ridge for $4 million. They did not legally own it. They had attempted to sell trust property behind Charles's back. The proposed buyer was a newly formed company called Horizon Crest Development. Claire searched through the corporate records. Horizon Crest was controlled by another company, which was controlled by a private investment partnership. One of the partnership's authorized representatives was Brooke Lawson. Claire felt the room tilt. Brooke had not merely entered Ethan's life because she loved him. She had positioned herself beside him while secretly attempting to acquire the family's most valuable undeveloped asset for a fraction of its worth. Claire continued reading. Emails showed that someone had provided Brooke with confidential maps, passwords, and internal valuations. The messages came from Ethan's executive account. Claire sat down slowly. She wanted to believe Ethan's account had been compromised. Then she found a signed authorization form. Ethan's signature was at the bottom. There was also a handwritten note. Brooke says this is our way out from under grandfather. Claire closed her eyes. The words brought back every night Ethan had accused Charles of controlling him, every conversation in which Brooke had encouraged him to claim what he deserved. But one question remained. If Ethan knowingly helped Brooke acquire the farm, why had she turned pale at the will reading? The answer was in a voice recording Charles had left on the desk. Claire pressed play. Charles's tired voice filled the office. Claire, if you are hearing this, then Brooke has probably discovered that she cannot complete the sale without control of the trust. He coughed. She believed Ethan would inherit my voting shares. She planned to marry him, persuade him to approve the transfer, and then move the property through her companies before the true valuation became public. Claire gripped the edge of the desk. Charles continued. Ethan is guilty of vanity, carelessness, and betrayal. I do not know whether he understands the full fraud. Brooke is guilty of something colder. She studied this family's weaknesses and turned them into doors. A floorboard creaked behind Claire. She spun around. Ethan stood in the doorway. His hair was wet from the rain. His face was pale. How did you get in? Claire asked. I followed you. That was a mistake. I need to know what he left here. Claire placed her hand over the documents. Did you sign an authorization allowing Brooke's company to purchase this farm? Ethan froze. How do you know about that? Answer me. She told me the land was losing money. You knew it belonged to the trust. She said grandfather would eventually transfer it to me. So you tried to sell an asset you did not own. I was going to buy it back through a holding company. Why? Because I wanted something that was mine. His voice echoed through the empty farmhouse. Claire stared at him. Ethan looked suddenly smaller, like the young man who once sat at a kitchen table dreaming about proving himself. She said we could develop it, he continued. She said the farm was the only asset grandfather had neglected. I signed an authorization for her to negotiate. I didn't know about the energy contract. Claire handed him the appraisal. He read the first page. His knees seemed to weaken. 120 million. At least. She told me it might be worth 8. She planned to purchase it for 4. Ethan turned to the corporate records. As he read Brooke's name, the last color disappeared from his face. No. She used you. No. She needed your access. She loves me. Claire felt an old pain move through her, but it no longer controlled her. You said the same thing about me once. Ethan looked at her. For the first time since the divorce, there was no arrogance in his expression. Only fear. His phone rang. Brooke's name appeared on the screen. He did not answer. At that exact moment, Claire's phone rang too. It was Samuel. Claire, you need to return to the mansion immediately. What happened? Someone leaked the trust documents to the press. By the time Claire reached the estate, reporters crowded outside the gates. Headlines were already appearing online. Ex-wife inherits Blackwood Empire. Nurse accused of manipulating dying billionaire. Family sources question secret trust. Claire stared at the words. Family sources, she whispered. Ethan stood beside her. It was Brooke. You don't know that. Yes, he said, I do. Inside the mansion, Brooke waited in the drawing room with Margaret and Dean. She was no longer pretending to be shocked. You went to the farm, she said. Claire removed her wet coat. You tried to steal it. Brooke smiled. That is a serious accusation. I have the corporate records. Records can be misunderstood. I have the emails. Accounts can be hacked. I have Ethan's signed authorization. Brooke glanced at him. He understood what he was signing. I did not understand the valuation, Ethan said. Her eyes narrowed. You followed her. She showed me everything. Brooke's expression changed. The affectionate woman vanished. What exactly did she show you? The truth. Brooke laughed bitterly. The truth is that your family would have destroyed this company within 5 years. Your grandfather knew it. Claire knows it. Everyone in this room knows it. Dean stepped forward. Watch your mouth. You approved $18 million in fraudulent contracts, Brooke snapped. Do not suddenly pretend you care about ethics. Margaret turned toward Dean. What is she talking about? Brooke looked at Claire. You believe Charles chose you because you were kind. He chose you because you were useful. You found the invoices. You protected the company. You were the loyal little nurse who never asked for payment. Claire's voice remained calm. And you believe people are only valuable when they can be used. Everyone uses everyone. No, Claire said, that is what people say when they want to stop feeling ashamed. Brooke's smile disappeared. Samuel entered the room with 2 security officers. Brooke Lawson, you are no longer permitted on trust property. You cannot remove me. Claire looked at Samuel. Yes, she can, he said. Claire controls the trust. Brooke turned to Ethan. Are you going to allow this? Ethan stared at the woman for whom he had destroyed his marriage. Did you ever love me? Brooke's silence answered before her words did. I loved what we could have built. With my grandfather's land. With your inheritance. You thought I would inherit the controlling shares. I thought Charles would behave rationally. Ethan looked toward Claire. Brooke followed his gaze. Then she understood. He believed Claire. The realization made her furious. You pathetic fool, she whispered. You threw away a woman who would have died for you, and now you are surprised that someone else saw how easy you were to manipulate. Ethan recoiled as if she had struck him. Brooke picked up her handbag. As she crossed the hall, she nearly collided with Rosa Alvarez, the elderly housekeeper who had served the Blackwood family for 30 years. Move, Brooke snapped. Rosa stepped aside. Brooke knocked a tray from her hands anyway. Silverware scattered across the floor. Claire rushed forward. Are you all right? Rosa nodded. Before Brooke reached the front door, Samuel's phone rang. He listened for several seconds. Then he looked at her. You may want to remain here. Why? The court has approved an emergency order freezing the assets of Horizon Crest Development and its related companies. Brooke stopped. Samuel continued. The vehicle outside was purchased through one of those companies. Investigators are waiting to seize it. Through the window, everyone watched two officials approach Brooke's luxury car. The confidence drained from her face. It was not magic. It was not coincidence. It was the consequence of assuming she would escape before anyone found the paperwork. Brooke turned back toward Ethan. You need to fix this. He shook his head. For once, I am going to stop fixing the damage I helped you cause. But Brooke had one final weapon. The next morning, Claire entered the boardroom to find a woman sitting beside Margaret. Claire stopped in the doorway. Her mother had aged, but Claire recognized her immediately. Diane Bennett, the woman who disappeared after Claire's father died. The woman who had missed Claire's graduation, wedding, divorce, and every lonely birthday in between. Diane stood. Hello, sweetheart. Claire could not speak. Margaret looked almost pleased. Diane contacted us after seeing the news. That was a lie. Claire could see it in the way her mother avoided her eyes. Brooke had found Diane. And judging by the new coat, expensive handbag, and nervous hands, Brooke had paid her. Diane faced the board members. My daughter has always been obsessed with wealthy families, she began. After her father died, she told me she would never be poor again. Claire felt the betrayal enter a place she thought had already healed. Some wounds did not disappear. They simply learned to remain quiet. Diane continued. She researched Ethan's family before meeting him. She knew who Charles was at that diner. That is false, Claire said. Diane's voice cracked. She planned everything. Ethan stood. Stop. Margaret looked at him. This testimony could remove Claire. No, it cannot, Samuel said. Even if it were true, which evidence strongly suggests it is not, it would not invalidate the trust. Diane glanced toward Brooke, who sat near the far end of the table beside her attorney. Brooke gave her a warning look. Claire saw it. So did Ethan. Claire approached her mother. How much did she pay you? Diane's lips trembled. I don't know what you're talking about. How much was my life worth this time? The question broke something in Diane. She looked at Claire's face, then at the small silver locket around her neck. It had belonged to Claire's father. Diane had given it to her on the day he died. For one suspended moment, the boardroom disappeared. Diane seemed to see not the woman controlling a corporate empire, but the 16-year-old girl standing beside a hospital bed, waiting for her mother to promise she would not leave too. Diane began to cry. $50,000, she whispered. Brooke stood. Do not answer that. Diane turned toward the board. She paid me $50,000 to say Claire targeted the family. None of it is true. Brooke's attorney grabbed her arm. Brooke pulled away. Diane continued through her tears. Claire never even knew Charles's name when she helped him. She called me that night because she was worried she had spent too much of her tip money on a stranger. Claire's chest tightened. She had forgotten that phone call. You remembered? Claire asked. I remember everything, Diane said. I was just too ashamed to come back. You came back to betray me. Yes. The single word was more honest than any apology. Diane removed an envelope from her handbag and placed it on the table. The money is here, I didn't spend it. Brooke looked around the room. You cannot prove I gave her that. Diane took out her phone. I recorded our meeting. The room erupted. Brooke's attorney demanded silence. Margaret accused Diane of entrapment. Dean tried to leave, only to find investigators waiting outside. Samuel raised his voice. No one is leaving until the board completes its emergency session. The hidden truth unfolded over the next 2 hours. Brooke had discovered the Blackwood Ridge Energy Project while reviewing confidential communications for the company. She created Horizon Crest to acquire the land before the public announcement increased its value. Dean approved false contracts that moved company money into consulting firms connected to her partners. Margaret signed the unauthorized sale agreement because Brooke promised her a private payment and lifetime control of the mansion. Ethan had provided access codes and signatures, believing he was helping Brooke secure his independence from Charles. He had not designed the fraud, but his pride had made it possible. Then came the board vote. Claire had the power to remove every director involved. But Charles's final instructions required her to give each person one opportunity to tell the full truth before she acted. Dean denied everything. Margaret blamed Charles. Brooke blamed Ethan. Then it was Ethan's turn. He sat at the long table with his hands clasped tightly together. Claire watched him struggle with the decision. If he confessed, he would lose his executive position, his reputation, and possibly his freedom. If he lied, Brooke might escape with enough uncertainty to continue fighting. Ethan looked at Claire. She did not rescue him. She did not nod. She did not offer forgiveness in advance. For the first time in his life, the decision belonged entirely to him. I gave Brooke access to my executive account, he said. I signed documents I did not read carefully. I knew the farm belonged to the trust, but I believed I would control the trust after my grandfather died. Brooke stared at him. Ethan continued. I also knew I was violating company rules. I told myself it was not theft because I expected the property to become mine. Samuel wrote something down. Did Claire participate in any part of the scheme? No. Did she ever ask Charles to alter his trust? Not that I witnessed. Did she manipulate his medical care? No, she was the only person who consistently followed his doctor's instructions. Ethan's voice weakened. She protected him even after what I did to her. Claire looked down. She had imagined hearing Ethan admit the truth many times. In those fantasies, it made her feel victorious. In reality, it only made her tired. The board voted unanimously to remove Dean and Ethan from their executive positions. Margaret lost her authority over the family foundation. Brooke and Dean were referred to federal investigators for suspected fraud, conspiracy, and attempted theft of trust property. Ethan agreed to cooperate fully. His cooperation did not erase his actions, but it prevented Brooke from placing the entire scheme on him. Claire did not celebrate. That evening, she returned to Charles's private study and closed the door. The mansion was quiet. On the desk, she found one final letter. Samuel had placed it there after the board meeting. Claire opened it. My dear Claire, If you are reading this, then the storm has arrived. I am sorry that my final gift to you came wrapped in conflict. You deserved a life untouched by this family's hunger. But I could not leave thousands of employees, generations of work, and the future of Blackwood Ridge in the hands of people who saw inheritance as permission. You once told me that kindness without boundaries becomes self-destruction. I hope you remember your own words. Protect what is good. Remove what is dangerous. Forgive when you are ready. But never confuse forgiveness with returning a weapon to the person who wounded you. Claire pressed the letter against her chest and cried. Not for the money. Not for the victory. She cried because Charles had seen her when she felt invisible. He had watched her lose her marriage, her place in the family, and the future she thought she would have. And while everyone accused her of being a gold digger, the wealthiest man among them had understood that she was the only person who never tried to take anything from him. Over the following months, Blackwood Holdings changed. Claire appointed independent directors and strengthened controls that prevented any executive from approving large contracts alone. She restored money to employee retirement accounts. She sold several private jets and used the funds to pay medical debts for workers facing serious illnesses. At Blackwood Ridge, she approved the renewable energy project, but only after negotiating protections for local residents. Part of the land became a training center where young people from low-income families could study engineering, nursing, finance, and sustainable construction. The old farmhouse was preserved. Claire kept the diner receipt Charles had saved from the night they met framed inside the entrance. Beneath it, she placed a small plaque. One act of kindness can travel farther than the person who began it will ever know. Diane entered counseling and found work at a community center. Claire did not immediately welcome her back into her life. Forgiveness, she learned, did not require pretending betrayal had never happened. They started with letters, then short phone calls. Months later, they shared coffee in a quiet cafe. Diane apologized without asking Claire to comfort her. It was the first honest conversation they had ever had. Margaret moved out of the mansion. For years, she had treated Rosa and the other staff members as though they were invisible. Now she lived in a smaller house without assistants, drivers, or a family company willing to solve every inconvenience. Dean faced criminal charges. Brooke's assets remained frozen while investigators traced money through her shell companies. The woman who once entered the will reading wearing diamonds and mocking Claire left court months later without the car, investments, reputation, or powerful marriage she expected to secure. Karma did not arrive as lightning. It arrived as documents, signatures, recordings, and consequences. Ethan avoided the most serious charges because he cooperated and provided evidence against Brooke and Dean. But he lost his position, his voting rights, and the luxurious life he assumed would always be available. He found work at a small logistics firm in another state. For the first time, his last name did not open every door. A year after Charles's death, Ethan returned to Blackwood Ridge for the dedication of the new training center. He stood at the edge of the crowd while Claire addressed employees, students, and community leaders. When the ceremony ended, he approached her near the white rose garden planted in Charles's memory. "You did what he hoped you would do," Ethan said. Claire looked toward the students entering the new building. "I'm trying. I owe you an apology. You owe yourself the truth more than you owe me an apology. I loved you. I know. I just didn't know how to value anything that didn't make me feel powerful." Claire looked at him then. He appeared older. Not broken. Awakened. "Brooke did not destroy our marriage by herself," he said. "She found the damage I had already created." Claire remained silent. I blamed you for making me feel small, he continued. But you never made me small. I felt small beside my grandfather, and instead of growing, I punished everyone who reminded me of what I was. Tears filled his eyes. I am sorry. Claire had waited years for those words. Now that they had arrived, she realized they were not a bridge back to him. They were the closing of a door she no longer needed to hold open. I forgive you, she said. Hope flashed across his face. Then Claire added, but I am not coming back. The hope faded, replaced by understanding. He nodded. I know. They stood together for one final moment beneath the white roses. Then Ethan walked away. Claire watched him disappear down the path, not with bitterness, but with peace. Charles had been right. Inheritance was not payment for sharing a name. It was responsibility. Ethan inherited the consequences of his choices. Brooke inherited the trap created by her own greed. Diane inherited the difficult opportunity to repair what she had broken. And Claire inherited more than an empire. She inherited the chance to prove that power did not have to make a person cruel. Years later, people still told the story of the will reading. They remembered Brooke calling Claire a gold digger. They remembered Ethan's chair striking the wall. They remembered the fortune no one knew Charles had placed beyond their reach. But those who understood the full story knew the real inheritance had been decided long before any papers were signed. It had been decided in a roadside diner when a tired young woman spent half her tips helping an old man whose name she did not know. It had been decided each time Claire chose loyalty when no reward was promised. It had been decided when she walked away from a wealthy marriage with less money but more dignity. And it had been decided when everyone around Charles asked what they would receive, while Claire asked what needed to be protected. In the end, the family empire did not pass to the person with the closest bloodline. It passed to the person Charles trusted to give it a conscience. Dear viewers, if you believe kindness should never be mistaken for weakness, and that betrayal, greed, and arrogance eventually create their own consequences, kindly subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell for more powerful stories like this one. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that losing people who do not value you is not always a punishment. Sometimes it is protection. And in the comments, tell us, did Claire make the right decision by forgiving Ethan without taking him back?